Hello and welcome to Notice Tonight, the show that decodes the region. I am Wasbir Hussain. For more than 3 decades, the Northeast has been debating the merits or otherwise of the stringent Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Those favoring the enforcement of this act that provides the armed forces rather sweeping powers to deal with insurgents or suspected insurgents say it is necessary to have such a tough piece of legislation because of the scale of the prevailing insurgency. Others say the act enables the armed forces to at times go scot-free after committing excesses in the name of combating insurgency. In the midst of this familiar discourse, Tripura in 2015 lifted the Armed Forces Special Powers Act 18 years after it was first enforced. Now, there are credible reports that the Assam government is considering withdrawal of the act from the state. If this happens, will there be pressure on states like Manipur, where the Armed Forces Special Powers Act has been enforced for more than 30 years, to think on similar lines, lifting AFSPA? Does the region actually need the act now, since the government itself says the level of insurgency is declining fast? We examined the issue during this discussion. Earlier, I spoke to former Army Chief General J.J. Singh on the subject. Let's take a listen. I am now joined by General J.J. Singh, former Chief of the Army Staff, former Governor of Arunachal Pradesh, one of the most decorated Indian Army soldiers. General J.J. Singh, welcome to Notice Live.
Thank you, Wasbir. I'm very happy to be with you.
Pleasure speaking to you. Now, General J.J. Singh, you see, Tripura has lifted the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and there are now very, very credible reports that Assam is considering withdrawal of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. So, how are you looking at it? What does this actually mean?
Okay, I will start from the historical background. Initially, when the situation became out of control in Nagaland, it is the government of India which went into the details, and then they found that there was a need for an enabling provision for the armed forces to bring the situation under control and establish the writ of the government. Right. So they coined this Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and that was enacted in the Parliament by an Act of 1958, and therefore it gave security and protection to the armed forces personnel involved in handling challenging, you could say, anti-national elements as well as terrorism in its new form now.
Right. From then and now, General J.J. Singh, things have improved, and perhaps that is the reason why Tripura has already withdrawn it and Assam is considering withdrawal of this act. Don't you think so?
Wasbir, actually the fact is that Tripura was always considered by the army as a law and order problem, not really needing armed forces intervention. Yet it was imposed because there were elements of terrorists and anti-national elements taking refuge in Tripura from erstwhile Bangladesh, erstwhile Pakistan, which is today Bangladesh. So after 1971 war, the situation started improving, and it is heartening to see that Tripura, the government and its administration, the law and order machinery, feels confident of handling the situation, and therefore they lifted the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. As far as Assam is concerned, similarly, I think the worst is over, and therefore whatever residual anti-national activity or terrorism remains, that could be examined by the government as also the state government in conjunction with the armed forces, and if they feel that on a selective basis as a trial measure, they could lift the AFSPA from certain areas and proceed according to the results what they see on the ground.
Absolutely. Now, sir, if I'm asking you this question in a slightly different way, now take the case of Manipur. You are a veteran. You are a veteran in this field. Take the case of Manipur, where the Armed Forces Special Powers Act has been in force for more than 30 years. The army has been operating against several militant groups. Yet, Manipur still continues to be an insurgency hotspot.
Yes. Wasbir, I can give a few reasons why it is happening. First and foremost is that in the earlier period, as I brought out earlier, Pakistan was helping these rebel groups to get arms and sustenance and other help. But after the Bangladesh was created, this help has absolutely stopped, and now we find that the rebels are finding sanctuaries in the border areas with Myanmar.
Yeah.
As long as the armed forces can act with impunity against them, not the innocent citizens, because as you know, the Indian Army has a very brilliant record of zero tolerance for human rights violations. So if you look at that, we ourselves don't allow latitude to anybody who infringes the human rights. They are getting their weapons, they are getting sustenance from the Myanmar side, not with their Myanmar government, but definitely from other sources, and they are raising funds from the people of Manipur and neighboring areas so as to buy the weapons from a black market which exists somewhere in the upper reaches of Myanmar. So I feel that this situation in Manipur has not been stabilized completely, though there is an improvement.
Right. General Jesse Singh, I mean, you know, if you look at the overall initiatives in the country, the modernization of the police force. Now, the police force across India has gone about rapid modernization in the last couple of years. They have advanced weaponry, they have advanced training. So is the case with the police in the northeastern region. Now, in view of this, General Jesse Singh, do you think there is need for the government to give the police a more frontal role in CI operations?
I would say the armed forces have a primary role, which is to defend the nation and to guard the borders. Now, we are the last organization which will want to be involved in internal security, in aid to civil authorities against unlawful groups or terrorists like this. As you would know, I would like to highlight that in the central area of India, where the Naxalite problem exists, on occasions the armed forces was asked to take active part and to bring the situation under control, and we resisted that. We have been continuously saying it is the primary duty of the civil police organizations to handle situations like that, because there is no external factor in play like is in Kashmir.
Now, General, I mean, in the case of the Northeast, you had served in this area, you were the governor of Arunachal Pradesh, you know this area inside out, General J.J. Singh. My question is, do you think that, you know, the time has come, considering that the level of insurgency has gone down, the scale of insurgency has gone down in the northeastern states, do you think there is a need to rethink strategy and maybe vest more responsibility or rather the lead role to the police, or do you think the time has not come for that as yet?
No, I feel that it is the basic responsibility of the government of the day and the state governments involved in handling situations in the Northeast to take a call whether they can handle the situation.
That is the point.
If they feel confident that the police and the paramilitary organization, the SAM rifles and others can handle the situation, the army it does not wish to get involved unnecessarily.
As an former chief of the Indian Army, General J.J. Singh, What would you personally like? Do you personally like that the army should be confined to its key role of protecting the borders, and all these internal security matters ideally should be left to the police?
I think if they can handle it, it should be done that way. But as you have seen, the evidence of whatever happens in various parts of our country, and particularly in the difficult forested terrain of Northeast, the paramilitary forces do need the help of the army. That is why the government has employed the army and asked them to bring the situation under control. So I feel it should be done, if at all, in Assam in a selective manner, because Assam is comparatively peaceful and there is no incipient organization. But other areas, they have to see whether they can handle it without the help of the army. Then it is a good thing, and the army would definitely welcome to be relieved from these duties, which detract the army from preparing for its basic and primary task.
Now, General, you have made a very valid point, and that is in sync with what the Government of India is thinking at this point in time. You see, earlier it was the Government of India that used to extend the notifications regarding the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. But this time what has happened is the Government of India has told the Assam government that we will not take a call on this. You take a call on this depending on the ground situation. That is what you said. Do you think that is the right way? Because law and order in any case is a state subject.
I think the Government of India has definitely maintained that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is a law or act which can be implemented either by the central government or by the state government under the orders or the proclamation by the governor. So it is a good step, and the government reposes confidence in the government of the day in Assam to decide and take a call. And as I said earlier also, it could be done selectively, but then it should not happen that those areas where AFSPA is lifted become hotbeds of terrorist activity and their funding and their overground workers.
Right. My last question to you, General, you know, at times the odd aberration by the security forces of alleged excess, the odd aberration, I'm using the word, you know, that is used by the insurgents to mobilize people on the streets against the government. So do you think in view of all this, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, there should be a relook, at least some modification is necessary? The Government of India itself set up committees to look into this. What is your personal take on this?
I personally feel that the armed forces have a very good track record of tackling human rights violations, and wherever we find someone who has done an odd aberration and is guilty, has been duly punished very severely in comparison to people outside the armed forces, the civil setup. So therefore we do not wish to handle a situation where innocents get harmed or their property damaged by collateral damage. So we are very particular about it, and I would say that the Indian Army has adopted a philosophy of an iron fist and a velvet glove, meaning that the people at large who are our own citizens, they are innocent, and the terrorists are the ones who need to be given the iron fist, but the people should be treated with a velvet glove.
So at the end, General, do you agree that there is a ball is in the court of the respective state governments, and the issue has to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, depending on the ground situation?
Yes, of course, definitely, but in consultation with the army.
In consultation with the army. That was General J.J. Singh. Thank you very much, General J.J. Singh, the author of A Soldier's General. And I understand you are coming up with your new book, and we'll all wait eagerly for that. General J.J. Singh, thank you very much for speaking to Northeast Live.
Welcome, Wasbir. Thank you.
Pleasure. Okay, I am now joined from New Delhi by Dr. Ajay Sahni, Executive Director of the Institute for Conflict Management and one of India's leading security and strategic affairs expert. Also in New Delhi, I have Justice Mukundakam Sharma, former Supreme Court Judge and former Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court. Mr. R.J. Lingdo, former Meghalaya Home Minister, joins me from Shillong. In Imphal, I have well-known human rights activist Bablu Loitongboam, and at our studios in Guwahati, I have Mr. G.M. Srivastava, former DGP Assam and Tripura, Dr. Nanigopal Mohanto, head of the Department of Political Science at Guwahati University and well-known political analyst, and Arunav Goswami, Assistant Director at the Guwahati-based Center for Development and Peace Studies. I would like to go straight to Mr. G.M. Srivastava. You had been the DGP in two of the northeastern states, Assam and Tripura. Is there now a case for withdrawal of AFSPA, considering that the government itself says that the law and order situation is improving, insurgency graph is declining?
You're right on that count, because the situation from what it used to be 10 years ago has improved a lot, and the insurgency or militancy is confined to now a very small portion of the state. There are 2 districts, and it should be possible for the forces to handle it. I would personally feel that it's time for army to move out of Assam, but it should be in a phased manner, because a sudden withdrawal might create a vacuum and it might give a different kind of a feeling in the minds of the people.
Right.
So what I feel as of now is that we don't have the armed forces working in Guwahati, Jorhat and some of these towns from day one, and it's time that we should now keep the lower Assam totally free from it. We should also take. We
will come back to the specifics, Mr. Srivastava, but basically the point you are making is that since there is an improvement, army should go, but in a phased manner. Now, Nanigopal Mohanto, I mean, we are talking about this whole discourse of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, people against the act, people in favor of the act, particularly the security establishment. Now, do you think Armed Forces Special Powers Act is one of the reasons that is keeping insurgency alive, at least in certain places of the Northeast?
Well, certainly, there are a lot of ramifications of this issue of AFSPA, particularly the Section 6, which gives, impunity to the armed forces for their activities, which was supposedly done in conducting their duties.
Yeah.
But the question is that, for example, if you look at the Supreme Court, look at the role of Supreme Court. It has maintained the validity of the AFSPA in 1998 in Naga People's Movement human rights case.
Yeah.
But again, look at the role of Supreme Court in 2016. Although it has not talked about the validity of AFSPA, but it has given very criticism and provided important criticism against AFSPA, against its misuse. Wasbir, we must remember, the question is not about use, question is about misuse. So that's why we find it 3 schools of thought. Army, on the other hand, generally tries to protect the AFSPA. On the other hand, civil liberty groups, they definitely want that this act should be repealed.
Yeah.
But I believe Army plays a very important role in countering insurgency or in CI operations. But in case of, in Northeast India, you look at 1548 cases, odd cases in Manipur, where there are extrajudicial killing, and most of them have not been convicted. So there is a very low ratio, which is around 9%. So my argument is that Indian Army is very professional. Even if you look at the Jivan Reddy Commission, people want army.
We will go into that.
Yeah.
We'll go into that. But the limited point, as your opening remarks,
definitely, it's not about the use. I'm talking about is it misuse.
Use versus misuse, and misuse is what is you are expressing concern on that. Yeah. Arnav, I'll come to you, but let me go to Dr. Ajay Sahni. Dr. Sahni, welcome. Tripura has withdrawn the Armed Forces Special Powers Act in 2015. Now, there are very, very reliable reports that Assam is considering withdrawal of this act completely. Now, what does it mean? Is it just because the scale of insurgency has come down, or is it because of other reasons that the government wants to have a better image?
Oh, absolutely. You see, if you go back to the record, Wasbir, Tripura at its peak experienced close to 500 fatalities in a year. And today, for the last 4 years, there have been 0 fatalities in Tripura. Similarly, if you look at the Assam situation, 400 to 550 plus fatalities were the norm at the peak of the insurgency. Today, you have low double-digit fatalities, 26 last year. So, I think AFSPA is not something that has been put into these areas for extraneous reasons. AFSPA was applied because the army and the central forces were required to contain the insurgency, the scale of the insurgency at that point of time.
Right. Dr. Sani, would you agree to this particular school of thought that since the police in this country has undergone rapid modernization, they have got better weaponry, therefore the police should be given a more frontal role actually in counter-insurgency operations?
Absolutely. You see, some of the most successful counter-insurgency campaigns in this country have been police-led.
Yeah.
Outside forces, however efficient they may be, however well equipped, well trained, well armed they may be, will always have a disadvantage as compared to local forces. Local forces are culturally familiar, culturally sensitive, and have far better access to intelligence. And intelligence is the key element in a effective and efficient counterinsurgency response.
Right.
No outside force can ever replicate the quality and the contours of intelligence that would be available to an effective regional force, a local force.
I would like to actually go to Bablu Loitongbom in Imphal. Bablu, if you can hear me, Bablu Loitongbom is a very well-known human rights activist in Imphal. Bablu Loitongbom, if you can hear me, Bablu, this discourse, the need or otherwise of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, we are discussing the Northeast, but Manipur, is there a case for withdrawal of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act at all in Manipur? But you have also to understand that insurgency is extremely active in Manipur today. As a human rights activist, what is going to be your take? Okay, there is
Wasbir,
audio,
in the case of Manipur, as you must. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Go on.
Hello.
Go on, Bablu.
Can you hear me, Wasbir?
Yes, go on.
Yeah, Wasbir, in Manipur in 2004, certain parts of Imphal, the Imphal municipal area has been, the disturbed area has been lifted.
Yeah.
If you look at the amount of crime that is committed in these areas.
I'll come back to you, Bablu Loitongbom. We are fixing your audio. Just hold on. I'll ask you this question again. Mr. R.G. Lingdo, you had been the Home Minister of Meghalaya. You have seen the situation closely. My question to you today, Tripura has already lifted the Armed Forces Act. Assam is seriously considering lifting. Does it mount pressure on other states in the northeastern region to actually remove the Armed Forces Special Powers Act? Can the act be modified? Can it be made a part of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act? What is your take?
Thank you, Wasbir. I think this is a very, very important topic insofar as we see the ground situation that's happening in the Northeast as a whole. In Meghalaya, when we tackle the militancy, by and large, it has been tackled by the state police force. And I personally feel, as has been said by the expert from the center, that insofar as militancy is concerned, it should be the job of the local police rather than an outside force coming in, because nobody knows better the cultural the culture, nobody knows better the topography than the locals. Now that AFSPA has been lifted in Tripura, I think that's a very, very good move, because personally I have never agreed that any section of the community should be above the law. We know that power corrupts, and we also know that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now we have seen instances, even though the general had said that the army is a very disciplined force and they have a very good track record insofar as human rights are concerned, but we have seen instances where massive infractions have happened, like the case where in the 90s where the whole Mokokchung market was burnt down just because a particular colonel was shot at by the militants. Now there is a tendency for things to flare up at just at the wink of an eye.
Yeah.
So in order to ensure that nobody goes above the law. We should put everybody within the law. I think that is very, very important.
Absolutely.
I think AFSPA should be lifted, and it is strange.
I would like to once again go to try
AFSPA
Imphal.
is only applicable in the Northeast and Kashmir.
Yes, just hold on. Just hold your thoughts, Mr. Lindo. Yes, Bablu Loitongbohm, I was asking you, what do you think? You on one side, you are a human rights activist. You obviously want the Armed Forces Special Powers Act to go. But as a citizen, don't you agree that insurgency is also at its peak in Manipur? Okay, Arunav, this question goes to you. We will go back to, we are fixing this audio with, see, on one side, human rights activists are saying that Armed Forces Special Powers Act is draconian act, it should go. But at the same time, you are keeping track of the scale of insurgency in Manipur, which is quite high.
Yeah, see, scale of insurgency is high in Manipur, but for the last 5-6 years, the scale has been diminishing. The number of fatalities and number of insurgency-related incidents have been on the downside. And the thing is that the provisions that there is in the Armed Forces Special Power Act, some of these provisions can now be incorporated in Unlawful Activities Prevention Act.
Because that was one of the suggestions of the Jivan Reddy Committee in 2005.
That was a suggestion of the Jivan Reddy Committee, and in fact, the Home Ministry had moved a proposal about that, and they wanted to amend the AFSPA and remove the word use of excessive force leading to death. So, the Home Ministry wanted to remove it in 2010 itself, but it was bogged down by the Defence Ministry. So, still this AFSPA has to be amended or repealed, and each provision has to be shifted to the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act.
Absolutely. We are getting into the mold. I have to seek the views of Nanigopal Mahanta, Mr. G.M. Srivastav. We'll go for a short, quick break, and we'll come right back and continue with this interesting discussion. Welcome back to Northeast Tonight. Bablu Loitongbohm, my question to you is extremely simple. As a human rights activist, we know that you would be wanting the Armed Forces Act to go as soon as possible. But as a citizen, won't you agree that the level of insurgency in Manipur is still quite high compared to some of the other northeastern states? So what is your take?
Wasbir, Armed Forces Special Powers Act come into operation once you declare an area as disturbed. Some parts of Manipur, this disturbed area status has already been lifted since 2004.
Right.
And have insurgency escalated in those areas? Certainly not. We see there is insurgency, there are reasons for insurgencies to be here, but AFSPA, if the taste of the pudding is eating, AFSPA have failed to deal with insurgency. In Manipur, AFSPA has been there for the last 60 years. If AFSPA could solve the problem, it would have solved 50 years ago. Now, to put the argument that because there is insurgency and therefore there should be AFSPA, to my understanding is putting the cart before the horse. It doesn't solve the problem. We see that if you, and what is the criteria for putting certain area under disturbed area? If you look at the crime rates or the insurgency activities, in fact, it is in those areas where there is no AFSPA that there were more insurgencies. And in the Hill district, where there has been a ceasefire for a long time, the level of insurgency has gone down considerably for many years. So we cannot understand this logic of lifting AFSPA in one place, but putting it at a place where the level of insurgency is much lower. It doesn't make any sense to us.
Right.
AFSPA,
let me take this.
Counterinsurgency will be there for a while.
Yeah.
We understand that, but you don't need it at the scale. We don't need it at the scale to mobilize the Indian army for that kind of
I'll
work.
come to you. I'll come back to you, Bablu. Just hold on. Let me take this question to Dr. Ajay Sani. Dr. Sani, we have seen Bablu says that it is for 60 years, but we know that Armed Forces Special Powers Act has been in force in Manipur since 1980. It's more than 30 years now, but yet it is an insurgency hotspot. Dr. Sani.
You see, first of all, we must understand that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is not a weapon or an instrument. It is an enabling act which allows the security forces, particularly central security forces, to operate in areas of insurgency. Now, the effectiveness or otherwise of the counterinsurgency campaign depends on a whole range of policy issues. not only on the quality of counterinsurgency operations or the intelligence flows available, but also the character of the terrain, the location, the cross-border support, and the political leaderships of these states themselves.
Yeah.
So unless these issues are addressed, insurgencies can drag on for decades, as they are in Manipur, as in fact they have dragged on for so many years also in other theatres in the northeast.
True.
So AFSPA will remain as long as these insurgencies persist at a sufficiently high level to require significant central force deployment.
True. I'll go to Mr. R.J. Lingdor, but before that, Nonigopal Mohanto, you know, at some point of time, see, the army is not in force in the Naxal-dominated areas in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and all these places, the Naxal hotbeds. The army is not in use. At one point, there was a suggestion, but the army said no, this is a law and order problem, let the police go. But in the case of the Northeast, that is not the case. The argument is that there are external forces involved, or that there is a cross-border basis available to the insurgents. That's the reason why army is operating. So, do you think there's a contradiction in that, or how do you look at it?
Well, Wasbir, you know, yeah, there is an element of truth here, that yes, we are having 99% border with South and Southeast Asian countries, and we are having cross-border terrorism and sanctuaries and all kind of, you know, logistical support from across the border. That is true. But at the same time, I would like to give an example from Tripura, where J.M. Srivastava Dangore, he was the DGP there, and I think this is one of the best examples. You just cannot say that the scale of violence has come down, and in fact a new doctrine has come up, which is called Agartala doctrine, by Subir Bhaumik. And credit goes to the Tripura government and to J.M. Srivastava that they have conducted the entire operations in such a manner that it virtually brought terrorism an end. It has come to an end. So I believe, this aspect must not be forgotten, and generally army has the tendency to belittle the contributions
I don't think I'll generalize on that. I will not agree with you on that.
But
I will not say that army has the tendency to belittle. Army has a role cut out, and the police also has a role cut out.
No, certainly, with due respect, they have, you know, but I have to say something else. If, you know, reduces the otherwise professional army, because they have a tremendous role to play. I have deep respect for them. But in the process, there is some kind of lumpenization. And I do not generalize it, Wasbir. And I have examples to show.
Yes, there may be odd cases, but we cannot, of course, generalize.
But what happens in many cases,
cannot at all generalize.
It goes down to kitni ko giraya.
No. That is not the general lingo. That may be an odd aberration. I have never heard of it. Anyway, J.M. Srivastava, does the police, what about the police? Do you think the police can do the job? Say, for example, but the general says that the situation is, we have not reached that level of stability in a state like Manipur, where the police really cannot take on the heavily armed militants who have borders across the border, who have sanctuary bases across the border. So, do you think, police yet to acquire that capability of dealing with heavily armed insurgents in pockets like Manipur?
No, in Assam and Manipur both, if police is trusted to the level which it should be, and if the governments back them up with the resources that they require, I am sure that they will be able to perform.
So, are you saying that the police is not really trusted to that level that it should be? Are you suggesting that?
Yes, you heard General saying that. General doesn't have a trust on the civil forces, and he thinks that they
need to be... Did he say that?
R.J.
Lindo,
something like that.
Mr. R.J. Lindo, you have been the Home Minister. There are suggestions from Mr. J.M. Srivastava, who has been a DGP in 2 states. They said that the police has to be trusted much more. In your tenure as the Home Minister, did you have full trust on your police, force?
Yes, definitely. Yes, definitely. We had full trust in the police force, and in fact, we upgraded their weapons. We upgraded the training that they got, and I think that is why they were able to do such a good job.
But
now to
Mr.
say
Lindo,
that the police force of the state cannot perform.
Yeah, but Mr. Lindo, there is also, you will also agree that there is a tendency among the state governments to actually call out the army at the drop of a hat.
Okay.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's true. See, every state government is a little wary of creating a situation which they will not be able to control. Every state government, knowing that law and order is a state subject, would like to remain in control. The moment you bring in the army, your control is diluted. So, but the only problem lies in the fact that today, maybe in a state like Manipur, they do not have enough trust and enough faith in their own police force. To say that the police cannot do it, I think is wrong.
You know, Bablu,
Let us understand one thing. The army is the face of the center in the northeast. Listen to me first, Wasbir. Let me just finish, please.
Yes.
The army is the face of the center in the northeast. The moment the army goes haywire, we see it as the Indian government that is going haywire. Now, do you want to bring our people closer to the Indian government, or do you want to widen the gap? That is a question that we must ask. Now, do we want to allow the army to work above the law? I don't think we should allow that. And in fact, we should see the army as a protector, not as an occupying force. The general public have to have trust and faith in the army as a protector, not as
Right.
an occupying force.
I'll-
AFSPA
Okay,
gives
now
them
let me-
the face of an occupying force, and I think that is wrong.
I'll come to you, Mr. Srivastav. Let me quickly go to Bablu Loitongbaum. Bablu, I mean, like, you know, the Mr. R.J. Lingdo, the former Home Minister of Meghalaya, he was saying that they have full trust in the police, and there's a suggestion that perhaps he said that Manipur doesn't trust its police to that level. So, do you think, you know, the police in Manipur can actually deal with this issue rather than the army? Do you think? But the militants are heavily armed, isn't it?
Well, the militants are armed and police are also armed. If need be, some paramilitary can always be called out under CRPC provisions, and that would be sufficient, to my understanding, to deal with the situation. The army can be put in reserve. If and as and when it is required, it can be called out. But as I was telling you, again, as a point of clarification, Wasbir, if you look at the parliamentary debates in 1958, when Armed Forces Special Powers Act was introduced, in 3 subdivisions, Armed Forces Special Powers Act was already applied in Manipur. Disturbed area was declared.
Yeah.
So, in 60 years, to continuously use the military, and the very fact that it remains as a gallatin which can be put down at any point in time is completely contradictory to democratic governance, and that is very problematic. If you have to rule Manipur perpetually under the military domination, that becomes very problematic. So it is a question of whether you treat these people as citizens of a democratic republic,
Right.
or are you treating them as some kind of a subject race that needs to be put under a state of exception permanently? That is the critical question that people in Manipur
I'll come to Mr. Srivastava,
any
but I will ask
democratically
this
minded
question to
citizen of this
Bablu.
country have to
I'll
ask.
ask this
You
question to
cannot
Dr.
put a
Azasani as well.
population-
But my question to you, Bablu Loitongbaum, is this. Do you think that it is because of the presence of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act that's rather helping the cause of the militants, because they have been able to mobilize people on the streets on whatever reasons?
Absolutely. No, this is becoming a very good rhetoric for the militants to organize. See,
Yeah.
India doesn't respect us as equal citizens. They can kill us as and when they please, and there will be no protection for you, is a very good rhetoric for young people's blood to boil and join insurgency. So,
Okay.
Armed Forces Special Powers Act is doing exactly the opposite of what it was originally intended to be. This point has
you
to
are
be understood.
agreeing to my hypothesis, Bablu. Let me take this question to Dr. Azasani. Dr. Sani, do you think rebels have on and off been able to, you know, use the AFSA to mobilize people on the streets against the government, taking recourse to that odd aberration or the aberrations by the security forces? Dr. Sani.
You see, I don't think the rebels are doing that. I think there are a lot of people who do not understand, or who are front organizations, or who are sympathetic to the rebel cause. But more often than not, I think they are well-intentioned people who don't really do what I would call due diligence. They have not understood the nature of the act. They keep on using these secondary language, these words. This is a draconian act. It is a violation of human rights, without understanding that this act has been looked at again and again by the Supreme Court, and it has come to the conclusion that there is nothing intrinsic to the act that allows the violation of human rights, that gives any kind of carte blanche or impunity for acts of human rights violations, for
Right.
rapes, for cold-blooded murders. There is no protection in the act. what you are speaking of when you are talking about human rights violations is usually acts of criminal collusion between the perpetrators and those who are required to hold them in check.
Mr. Lingdo, RG Lingdo, do you agree to that view that militants actually take advantage of the presence of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act to mobilize people, to rally against the government on whatever reasons at a drop of a hat rather?
Wasbir, it's like this. Now, if there is an aberration to any human rights, immediately the militants take advantage of that. Second thing is that now, if any person, any innocent person is injured in or is taken into custody, immediately what happens is the relatives of that person seek revenge, and they seek revenge against whom? They seek revenge against the people they see as in power. And invariably, if the army is in operation there, they start hitting out at the army. And that is why it is difficult to control militancy under such circumstances. We have to make the people understand that the army is ours. Army is not somebody else's, it is ours. We have to learn to trust the army, we have to learn to have faith in the army, then only we can work together with the army. But Armed Forces Special Powers Act creates a rift, creates a big chasm between the army and the people and the public. That's what I feel.
Jim Srivastav, Armed Forces
Because it
Special
allows
Powers Act
aberrations.
creates a
I'm
rift,
not talking about
creates a divide between the people and the army.
In fact, in case of Manipur, that has been the case, in a number of seminars and the other interactions with the people from that state, we have been told that one of the major reasons of escalation of violence in that state has been the misuse of this act and the conduct of the army personnel on ground. I am not telling that the entire army as such, but that has been there. And in the process, what has happened, that the attitudinal difference that the army carries, anybody who is local is not to be trusted, that kind of a feeling goes, because we have been privy to such discussions while we were handling situations in Assam. And let me again tell you, Punjab has been a classic case where generally it has been the local police with the help of other forces. Tripura we could do it, and even in Assam, when we really broke the backbone, it was just about 400 odd Assam police boys who have done the job. So, I always feel that if the force is trusted, it is backed, it is given the wherewithal which it requires, and some amount of protection. You grant blanket protection to the army, but you do not protect your own boys who are local and who would be giving you better information and better situation handling devices.
No,
so, and
true.
the second point I will tell you, Wasbir, is that this AFSPA and the Disturbed Areas Act is also a kind of a thing. Some of the states, I am not blaming any state, I am not pointing out anybody, but that is one way of getting a lot of money and resources from the central government in the name of disturbed area and handling of situation.
Nanigopal Mohanto, I mean, this whole discourse.
Yeah, I mean, that's called what I call democratic deficit. One thing we must remember, there is a difference between the terrorist and the Indian state. Indian state cannot reduce itself to the status of a terrorist. So, therefore, you have to protect the rule of law, which is the binding principle of Indian constitution. The point I am trying to say is that otherwise we have a very professional army that gives very good name to the country. So, by having this kind of exceptions, these exceptions give a very bad name, number one to Indian state, number two to the whole status of Indian democracy. And there is some evolving doctrine that I would like to say. In 2006, Indian army has evolved a new doctrine called sub-conventional counterinsurgency operations, whereby they have developed 5 principles whereby there will be no collateral damage, there will be more focus on intelligence, there will be hard intelligence, so that the precision will be the main principle. And I must tell you, Wasbir, that actually there is a kind of acceptance that if you have AFSPA, you generally tend to neglect the question of peace negotiation and the question of when. Winning the hearts and minds of the people. That is the basic doctrine, and that comes under sub-conventional doctrine that the Indian army has evolved in 2006. There are 4 or 5 principles. That is 1, respecting the human rights, number 2, intelligence, number 3, proper precision, and taking the people along. So, what I am trying to say is that Indian army is a very professional army. You have to respect the democratic nuances, and that is what makes the Indian state different from Pakistan. That's what makes Indian state is different different from Bangladesh and whole lot of other Afro-Asian nations. That is why, even
Bablu,
last
let
point,
me-
this
let
act
me-
of section of
Yeah, carry on.
Section of 49 of Unlawful Activities Act. Now, it says in 49, it gives the same amount of immunity to the Indian state, it gives immunity to the police and administration. By enabling that act, I believe you can definitely get your work done. So, question is not about, not having power.
I'll come back to you, Mr. James Srivastav. Bablu Loitongbohm, the Tripura has withdrawn, as I've said, in 2015. Now, Assam is thinking of withdrawing the AFSPA. Now, do you think that is going to mount some pressure on the government in Manipur also to follow suit? Because the new government is trying to give an impression. Yesterday only he told our channel, the Chief Minister, that these doors are open for talks with the militants, that they are taking initiatives. Now, do you think that is the decision by Assam, to withdraw, the likely decision, is going to impact on Manipur?
One only hopes that Wasbir, the present Chief Minister himself was once upon a time a human rights activist, and we do pin a lot of hope on Biren. The only problem is that he speaks the right word, but we don't know whether he will be following it up with right action or not. Having said that, Wasbir, let me also point out one thing. What the Supreme Court have done in the Naga People's Movement for Human Rights case in 1997 was only to look at whether AFSPA violates certain procedures and certain constitutional provisions. The conclusion that they have said is that no, they have not violated. And this was examined by Jeevan Reddy and the committee. And the Jeevan Reddy committee have clearly said that this does not mean
Yeah, carry on, Bablu, carry on.
endorse
Yes, carry on.
and advisability of continuation of Armed Forces
Yeah,
Special
carry
Powers
on.
Act. This needs to be understood very carefully. It is one thing to say that it is okay within the constitutional framework to have a law like this.
Yeah.
It is quite different to say whether it is desirable and advisable to have a law like this. The Jeevan Reddy Commission has clearly stated that this is absolutely undesirable because it has become a symbol of hatred and an object of discrimination.
Yeah.
And
Now-
therefore this needs to go.
Yes,
I think it is about time for us that
Bablu,
we
you
realize
see,
that
Dr.
we do away
Bablu, you see, Dr. Nanigopal Mohanto has raised this issue of the extrajudicial killings, 1,500 odd. Do you see a link? Is there a link? Because this is not necessarily by the army or not necessarily by the armed forces. Security forces, yes, but not necessarily only the army. It is the state police were also involved in some of the charges. They were also accused of some of these killings.
Wasbir, the simple principle that power corrupts man and absolute power corrupts absolutely runs into whether it is police, our own politician or the army. So the simple principle of governance is that the more power you give to any authority, public authority, the more accountability you should build into it.
Yeah.
AFSPA is a case where you give absolute power to the military to the extent of killing citizens and absolutely no accountability because High Court cannot ask questions, the civil authority cannot ask questions. So it's a simple logic that when you give this much amount of unaccountable power to anyone, they will abuse it. And with
Yes.
AFSPA for 60 years, the whole administration and the counterinsurgency has become accustomed to this
let me take
climate
what
of
has been
impunity.
Mr.
And the
Srivastav's
mess that we are
experience.
seeing in Manipur
Mr.
today
Lingdo, I'm
with
coming to you.
1,528 is that.
Mr. Srivastav,
Yeah, like I said,
he said power corrupts.
Yeah, it's that. I'll tell you. You see, we have always treated, in fact, at least I have always believed that this is like antibiotics. And it's not that in every case you have to give the antibiotics and continue for ages. Antibiotics have a limited period for which it has to be utilized. Like similarly, this act being promulgated and put in use for such a long period has also resulted in some areas. I am not naming that particular area because it may, but it has started correcting army to the extent that they got a taste of civil administration and came up with a proposal that the district magistrate should be replaced by a full colonel and the SPs should be replaced by a major or this thing and the civil administration. The army doctors should take over the thing in a particular state. Now, what is this all? Are we not going the Pakistan way? This is what was discussed at that point of time, and somehow we all were there and we could kill this particular move by the armed forces. So if you put these people with such a long thing.
We must also realize that we are totally responsible to the elected governments. Everyone is accountable at the end of the day to the elected government. So that is the savior. In fact, let me take this question to Dr. Ajay Sani. Dr. Sani, we were just discussing that extrajudicial killings in Manipur, 1500 odd cases. Supreme Court had to constantly sort of prod the CBI to come up to hasten up the process, to speed up the investigations. So what do you think of this?
You see, first of all, I think the perspective has been extremely, the Supreme Court has merely said that these things should be investigated. It has not said anything about the guilt or otherwise.
Yeah.
There are 6 cases that have been actually evaluated by a Supreme Court appointed committee. Now, the most forceful element of evidence that this committee found, suggesting that human rights violations had been committed, was the fact that all the bodies or the post-mortem reports on all the bodies of those in those 6 cases bore between 6 and 23 bullet injuries, and they came to the conclusion that this was evidence of excessive use of force. Now, I would like to suggest that these people do not even have an understanding of the capacity of a modern assault rifle. The average rate of fire of an assault rifle is between 650 and 700 rounds per minute. So a single burst would put in 6 to 10 bullets into the other into the target.
Yeah.
So there is nothing as yet in these allegations. These 1500 so-called cases are often just lists of names with very little information attached, no witnesses, no records.
Absolutely. Arnav, nobody bothered about the Jivan Reddy Commission recommendations. It is already 13 years now since the Jivan Reddy Commission gave its recommendations in 2005.
Yeah, in fact, there has been media reports since 2015 that the cabinet has wanted to reject the finding, and the findings have been forwarded to the Cabinet Committee on Security, and it's now being silently killed. The recommendation will not be accepted by the government. And here, taking on the discussion, I would like to give an example of Iraq. When the United States invaded Iraq and formed the Coalition Provisional Authority, they wanted to go close to the people. In fact, they bought in private military companies and they issued an order number 17, through which they gave immunity to the private military companies. They were immune from Iraqi laws. But what did happen? That these private military companies went in rampant human rights abuse, and in fact, the people were disgusted by the American soldiers. It went to
but
such
I
extent.
think that comparison you cannot bring to the Indian Army and the Northeast.
I am saying
you cannot bring.
Yeah.
I think we cannot really bring that example and try to fit into the northeastern Indian situation, because the Indian Army has its own set, as the general was saying during the interview.
I was saying this kind of
very particular,
kind
and
of
our media
resentment.
Most important part in the India, you cannot underestimate the power of the Indian media. It's still extremely free press that we have still. I'm using the word still. Still the press in India is free. You cannot put under the carpet major excesses committed by anyone, whether it is political elements, whether it is security elements and so on. But we will continue. This is definitely a point of view that cannot be ignored, the point which you raised. On that note, we should go for another short break. Stay on. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Mr. R.G. Lingdo, we have enough provisions, to deal with issues of crime, law and order, isn't it? So, Armed Forces Special Powers Act is used in an extreme situation, but we have enough provisions to enable our security forces to act tough against anti-national elements, against insurgency, terrorism, whatever you call it.
See, Wasbir, if we are to fight insurgency or militancy or whatever you want to call it, if we are to fight them, we have to understand that I think 70% is a psychological warfare, and 30% is an actual confrontation, a physical confrontation between the security forces and the militants. Now, at all times we have to ensure that the public, their allegiance should be with the security forces and not with the militants. The moment the allegiance of the people is with the militants, it will become very difficult to control militancy. And I feel that AFSPA, it deals with only the 30%, which is the actual physical force. That 70%, which is essential if militancy or insurgency is to be controlled, is not addressed by AFSPA. And that is where this act, I feel, is unnecessary for the Northeast. Here in the Northeast, the moment you have the people working together with you, you will be able to deal with insurgency. That is something that we have to understand. Anything, any act, any aberration that will widen the gap between you and the public and drive the public to have the allegiance with the militancy will make it difficult for you to actually control insurgency.
Absolutely.
That is something that we have to understand.
True.
So to say that, just by we're going to just use force to control insurgency is not going to happen.
Now, I have to ask you this question, Bablu Loitongbom, that, I'm not asking to you or your organization, but the general question which the human rights groups generally face is that, okay, the human rights groups take to the streets, protest when there is excesses committed by security forces, but the human rights groups keeps quiet when there are excesses committed by the insurgents. So this is a common allegation against the human rights groups in the Northeast and perhaps elsewhere. Okay, we are reconnecting to Bablu Loitongbom. The question goes to you, Nani Gopal Mohanto.
Wasbir, I think that is true up to a point. When you have some civil liberties group who generally acts as the frontal organizations of insurgent groups, they may generally legitimize the activities. But as if you look at, for example, in Nagaland, there is a gathering of more than 1 lakh people in Kohima and in other parts of various parts of Nagaland, whereby people have come out openly against the kind of excesses indulged in by the various insurgent groups. And again, even in Assam, you will find lot of civil liberties group, lot of civil society people coming up to protest against the kind of that is why the alienation took place. That is how people have gradually taken out their confidence from the insurgency, because they have failed to take the people into confidence. Why ULFA? Why ULFA has practically is not a force today in Assam? Because the kind of promises they have made, they simply failed to take the people along.
Right.
And when they came out, when the kind of greed factor rather than grievances factor became predominant, I think that's how it brought the down of insurgent groups like ULFA.
True. I will take this question. We are now connected to Bablu Loitongbom. Bablu, I was asking you this question, this is not directed at you personally or your organization, but the general question, the general charge is that the civil liberties group or the human rights group, they come to the streets, they protest when the excess committed by the security forces, and they generally prefer to keep quiet when there are similar excesses committed by the insurgents or the militants. Bablu.
Well, Wasbir, we are too familiar with this debate.
Yes.
See, protection of human rights is the primary responsibility of the government. Civil liberty groups comes up when the very forces or the government who is obligated to protect the human rights violate them. See, when private people violate, it is called crime, and there is a law called the IPC and CRPC that deals with those problems. If there is a situation of armed conflict, and if the government admits that they are no longer in control of certain groups, then there is rule of law that needs to be applied under the international humanitarian law. The first situation is what we call the Common Article 3 principle that applies when a certain guerrilla groups are able to strike at will. And that comes into play when the government admits that there is a situation of armed conflict.
Right.
In those cases, we would be more than happy to deal with whether the insurgents are actually following are you dealing with armed conflict situation, and are you dealing with combatants?
Nani Gopal has a question for you, Bablu.
For every situation, there are rules of law that needs to be applied.
There are situations, for example, in Assam, when ULFA was gherraud by the army in certain jungles of Dibrugarh, all of a sudden one particular civil liberty group came up in Guwahati party, and they urged for talks, and that's how I'm afraid one negotiation group has come up. So there are, I mean, innumerable examples wherever we have found out the civil liberties groups have acted in collusion.
Let him respond. Yes, Bablu, respond.
I mean, there are examples. What I mean to say is this.
Well, I cannot speak for each and every civil liberty group
Yes.
that exists in the region of in the country, but I can speak of the principles of human rights that is available. The principle is very simple. In a peaceful situation, the obligation to protect human rights is for the government, and it is for the civil liberty group to remind the government of this obligation. If there is a crime that is committed, it is the responsibility of the police to deal with those crimes. Civil liberty groups are not equipped or entitled, or they are in any way responsible for crime, criminal activity.
My other question, why did this appear later on? Why
If there
did
is
this
a
appear?
situation
I
of
mean, there are
armed
many
conflict.
examples. They
Yeah,
become
you cannot
proactive in
generalize.
certain
Yes, you are
situations.
right. Let me ask RJ Lingdo. Mr. Lingdo, what has been your experience with the civil liberties or human rights groups? I'm asking you a general question, not directed at any particular group. Have these organizations been helpful in dealing with insurgency and bringing the insurgency to the talk process? What has been your personal experience in Meghalaya?
See, in Meghalaya, I have found that whenever we worked with traditional institutions, whenever we worked with civil liberty groups, hand in hand together with them, the results have been very, very good. You know, a lot of surrenderies have come through these civil liberty groups, but there have also been instances where civil liberty groups have always stood up for militants at the expense of the government or at the expense of
There are two
security
sides.
forces. There have been such
That's what
instances.
Nani
as
Gopal
well.
Mahanta was
But
saying.
all in all, I feel that if we are to control insurgency, we have to be able to bring civil liberty groups to work together with you. The government has to reach out to them and bring them and make them understand that we are fighting insurgency together. It is not an us, but we together can solve insurgency. I have found that even church groups have played a major role
yes.
in
Nagaland
bringing
church plays a very, very lead role.
insurgents and militants to the negotiating table. I
True.
think that is very, very
Dr. Azhar
even
Sani,
in Meghalaya it has happened. Even Garo Hills has
But
happened
church also
recently.
propels it in Tripura.
Well, Dr. Azhar Sani, we were just discussing the various provisions, the need or otherwise of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Do you think existing provisions are enough to deal with crime, insurgency, terrorism? Do you think we have enough of these provisions to deal with a situation, even without the AFSPA?
AFSPA has nothing to do with crime. It is not a criminal law. AFSPA is an enabling legislation. AFSPA is an enabling legislation that says.
Right. Right. Now, insurgency can we control with existing laws? Dr. Sani.
You cannot control insurgency with existing laws or without existing laws. What we are talking about here is whether the army and the central paramilitary forces are to be deployed in an area or not. If you wish to control insurgency with existing laws, then you can only do it with the police. If the army or central forces are going to be deployed there, they require an enabling act which says, yes, these forces can operate, they can open fire, they can detain people under these circumstances. That is all that AFSPA does. AFSPA is not a counter-insurgency law. It is an enabling legislation that allows minimal power to central forces to operate in an area where they have no other legal cover.
Right. Mr. Srivastav, Dr. Azhar Sani is of the view that you cannot control insurgency with the police because they have limited immunity. Basically what he's saying that you have to open fire, you have to search without warrants, you have to do a lot of things. You have to control insurgency. It's not just ordinary crime.
No, it's not that. I don't think Ajay ji has said anything of that kind, because he had been a partner to many of the things which we have done in the past, and he knows how things work in it. Maybe he is not opening up here on the TV. One. Number two, it's the overutilization of this act or the provisions of this act which has been the cause of worry for us all these years. And the first casualty of this particular act has been a proper perception management of the population. And somehow or the other, you know, this act has also helped in people realizing that the militants are too well equipped and they are scared of them. And besides this, the segment of society which takes a lot of pride in this thing that the particular person who is heading this group has never been arrested, or he is from my community, your community. I mean, and if you have had a chance of talking over telephone or having had an interview of this man, you think that you have achieved something very big. You are not treating him like he should be treated. You are defying him, you are glorifying him, and that kind of a thing. And a section of press, even today, the media, electronic media especially, is trying to glorify most of these militant groups, and these are the things which are impediment in managing the perception of the people about the misdeeds.
But media's job is to bring different points of view across to the public domain.
I fully
and most
agree.
of the time it is the media which is used by the government and its agencies to
that
pass
is
a
all
message
part of
through
it, but
or get a message across.
Wasbir, but in case of Assam or the Northeast, it has been the militants who have been using media more than the government.
That will be a different debate.
Yeah,
we will debate that.
We will like
to
have
a separate debate on that, Mr. Srivastava.
I would rather like to name also if you want.
Arunav, I am not going into that debate right now. That's a matter of debate and it's a matter of perception management perhaps of the media and the authorities or the section of it. Arunav, I mean, like,
be having his own
yeah, of course. That's why I said it's a matter of debate. We'll debate it some other time. Arunav, I mean, like, you know, the perception management, the mind and winning the mind and hearts and so on, some kind of campaigns always launched by the establishment. So do you think that is essential? Do you think that has worked to clear perceptions or to improve perceptions?
Actually, that perception management has not worked. That's the because of which the Armed Forces Special Powers, because of this Armed Forces Special Power Act, the army is now being seen as an occupying force by many people. That was the perception earlier. The perception is slowly changing, but still that perception management and awareness is needed. We have to, people have to believe that the Armed Forces Special Power Act and the Indian Army are not an occupying force. They are not abusing the human rights of the people here. Only then, and these certain amendments has to be made to this act. Only then the Armed Forces Power Act can be said to be more human and not a draconian act as what it seems.
You know, what interestingly Wasbir, if you look at the Jiban Reddy Commission report and the various petitions filed by various people in Manipur, you will find that, you know, people want army, but they do not want the misuse of this draconian law, quote unquote, number one. Number two, Wasbir, you must also learn that now the entire nature of conflict has changed. It has become now protracted conflict. Previously it was interstate war. Now it has become intrastate. So that is how Indian Army must learn. And I also beg to differ with Sahni, who says that we need an enabling act. But this Section 49 Unlawful Activities Act 1967 is equally enabling act. I do not want to read it out, but it says very clearly that this impunity has to be given to the officers of central government and to the state government.
Immunity.
Yeah. So, I mean, it creates a culture of impunity actually. That immunity leads to impunity. That's what my point is. Secondly, what I am trying to say is that it is the peace talks or the conflict resolution mechanism of Indian state which is giving you more, I mean, benefit rather than, you know, the AFSPA or army. Look at the kind of politics of accord from 1985, Assam Accord, then you have the Mizo Accord, then you have the TNV Accord, then you have 1997 ceasefire accord. Now you have host of 23 peace accord or whatever you call it, memorandum of understanding, suspension, operation. That has brought actually, you know, this kind of conflictual situation down. So what I'm trying to say is that it is the AFSPA is just a minor area, and this entire culture of impunity gives a very bad name to Indian Army. That's how they must learn to fight.
Last words, Dr. Ajay Sahni, are you in favor of modifying the AFSPA?
Oh, absolutely, but I mean, this is not something I'm in favor of. This is the fundamental presumption of AFSPA, that it will only be applied to areas which are very, very disturbed. And therefore, they are declared to be disturbed areas under the Disturbed Areas Act, and only then does AFSPA apply to them. And once you find that the police capacities are sufficient, either because the problem has diminished or because police capacities have improved sufficiently to deal with the problem, there is no grounds for the deployment of central forces. And if there is no grounds for deployment of central forces, AFSPA is not required.
Absolutely. Bablu Lottingbaum, your last words. I mean, where do we go from here? Are we going to continue with this discourse? I think we lost the audio there with Bablu Lottingbaum. Arjun Lingdo, your last words. Are we going to continue with this discourse? Is there a way forward?
See, insofar as AFSPA is concerned, let me just say one thing. You know,
Very
violence
quickly.
will beget more violence. AFSPA, somehow or the other, allows a certain section of the people to work above the law. And that, in fact, creates a lot of intimidation. It creates a lot of insecurity among the public. I think the time has come now that we have to understand that we need to work with the people if we are
Work
to
with the
control
people.
insurgency.
Absolutely.
Any act or any law that will alienate any security forces from the people has to be removed.
Absolutely. Whether there is a law or act or no act, but everyone has to work with the people. That is the moot point. Bablu Lottingbaum, your last words. Are we going to continue with this discourse? How long?
It is an obnoxious act. The sooner it goes, the better it is for democracy in Manipur, in Northeast, and in the whole of India. To save democracy, we have to get rid of Armed Forces Special Powers Act. It has no place in a democratic governance. Military should be confined to military operations and when they are fighting the enemies across the border. The sooner it goes, the better it is for this country.
I think the army also doesn't want to get involved in internal security duties. They have better things to do, protect India's borders, keep all of us safe. Nanigopal Mohanto, your last words.
Well, you see, Indian army is a very important aspect of Indian democracy. We cannot just demoralize them. But having said, I believe AFSPA gives them a bad name. I think we should do away with this law and we should better equip them with other legislation.
Arunav.
Yeah, I have 2 points to say. The Armed Forces Special Power Act,
Very briefly.
yeah, the Armed Forces Special Power Act has to be repealed or amended, and the state police has to be further trained in counter-insurgency, so that once the armed forces are removed from this area, the state police can take on the counter-insurgency role.
Absolutely. Mr. G.M. Srivastav.
Well, both Manipur and Assam, they should have a program to withdraw army in the phased manner. They should give themselves a period of 6 to 8 months, or maybe in case of Manipur a year, train up their men, select their men, and then gradually take over from army, and army should be allowed to go and fight the Chinese who are going to threaten us from every nook and corner. And if Northeast has to be protected, army has to be on the border fighting China and not fighting our own boys here, whom we can perhaps handle and communicate and convert.
Absolutely. There is a role from the army, there is a role for the army, but that is across the border or protecting our own borders. We have to leave a lot of things to the police, but for that a situation has to emerge. So the discourse is not going to end anytime soon. We have to continue with this debate, but sooner we have to end this, sooner we can end this discourse, the better. On that note, we end this edition of Northeast Tonight. I thank all my panelists for being with me this evening. Good night and goodbye.